Okay, I want to talk about Romans chapter 1, verse 24, 26, and 28. And there's a phrase in there that might be troubling to some of you. The NASB, ESV, King James Version uses this phrase, gave them up. NIV, which I prefer, uses a phrase, gave them over. Uh, God gave them over, gave them up, and then follows a litany of many, many, many bad sins. And you might be thinking, does God just give up on me? This is not so much about you and the life you're living right now, though it could apply to you, but it's not really the point what Paul's driving at. This whole passage, this whole section is Paul's cosmic history of the world, the history of sin and the human race, the history of human nature itself. This is the spiritual history of humanity's relationship to God. On a very grand level, Paul is asking what is sin and what are its consequences on the whole human race and all of creation, not particularly about you and your own life. So, Paul is talking about the sin of idolatry in particular and the consequences of idolatry and all those sins that follow. And because of the sin of idolatry, Paul is saying God is giving people over, or giving people, or he gave them up. So, to understand this, I want to think about this idea of cosmic hierarchy that is at the very core of God's universe. God is on top, and right below God are human beings. Then below human beings are various orders of animals. And at the very bottom of this cosmic order are maybe bugs and worms, and below that are inanimate objects like rocks and dirt and minerals. To worship is to adore, love, and cherish and please, to imitate, and to be shaped and molded to that thing that you're worshiping. As a human being, the only thing you should ever worship is God, because God is the only thing that is higher than you, that is above you. Okay, it's God, then human beings, then everything else. Nothing else is worthy of your worship. When you worship anything else, you're worshiping something that's beneath you. You are worshiping an idol, you're worshiping an animal, a material object, or other people, or the things of this world. And idol worship is degrading to you, it's dehumanizing. Idol worship is disordered because there's an order to the world. You have to worship the thing above you. To worship people or anything below you is disordered. There is, again, a cosmic order, and you're disrupting the cosmic order when you worship anything other than God. When you worship and love God as you ought to, your loves are rightly ordered. It's a good and proper thing to love food, nice material things, and people, and the pleasures. Desires are good things that God has placed in us. When we worship and love God, all good desires are placed in their proper order. Augustine, in his book The City of God, writes about rightly ordered loves. I like that phrase. I find that very useful. Uh, Dante, in his book Purgatorio, writes about sin as disordered love, disordered loves. When you worship things that are beneath you, your inner loves are wrecked. They're jumbled. In the long run, your life will fall apart and collapse into chaos. Just imagine if I love food as I ought to, but I love food so much that I become a glutton. Am I going to wreck my health? Let's just say I love my friends, which is good. But let's say I love my friends so much to the point of obsession that I love my friends more than I love anything else, including God or my family or my job. You can imagine my life will be wrecked. It's good to love my friends, but it has to be placed in its proper order and priority. There is this idea of the restraining grace of God. That God's grace, we know what that means. God is merciful and kind to us. But God's grace also restrains us in a good way. God keeps us from being as bad as we could be. Even when you're not asking for it, even when you're probably not even aware of it, God's got these invisible braces holding our lives together. Okay? And He's keeping us from decomposing. He's actually holding back the full capacity of the potential of our sin. I want you to think of like a gigantic dam, like the Hoover Dam, all right? And you're standing at the bottom of the Hoover Dam, and let's say there's a little faucet at the bottom of this dam, and there's a pretty big trickle of water gushing out of this dam. And you think this trickle of water is your sin or the sin of humanity. But humanity is blind to the gigantic lake behind the dam. The giant dam, the giant lake is humanity's full sin potential. Okay? And the dam is actually the grace of God holding back all that sin. A little is coming out, but God's actually only allowing you to be a little bit sinful compared to how sinful you actually could be. That is God's restraining grace. So I want you to think about the parable of the prodigal son. The father did not kick the son out and tell his sinful son, like father did not kick his sinful son out and tell that son to get sinful. The son requested it. The son wanted to go away. And what should the father have done? Put him under house arrest? Lock him in his room? Chain him to his bed? At some point, the son's going to get old enough and the father just has to let him go. Perhaps his whole life, the father was trying to restrain the son like God's restraining grace, trying to hold back the son's worst impulses and tendencies. Right? But at some point, the son gets so old that the father says, I can't hold you back anymore. You're an adult. If you want to leave, leave. I can't chain you to your bed. In that sense, God allows people to give people over to the sinful tendencies. You really need to read C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce. It's about heaven and hell. It's an imaginative and speculative book. It's not exactly, it's not theology. It's just his imagination. But I find it very helpful. It helped me think through a lot of ideas. In his book of Heaven and Hell, The Great Divorce, people are in hell because they want to be there. All their lives, these people, they seek to be free from God. And all their lives, God is preventing them from being their own worst selves. He's restraining their sinfulness. They are sinful, but God is keeping them from being as bad as they could be. Even in their rebellion, God's presence, God's love, God's urging, holding them back, wanting them to come back, inviting them back, it's always there. And all their lives, they just keep fighting against God, kicking and screaming of all the restraints that God has put on their lives. So at the end of all things, when they're dead, when they have to, where they spend all eternity, God says something like, I will give you your heart's desire. All your life, you want it to be away from me, away from my grace, away from my order. You want to be where I am not, and that's what hell is. Hell is where God is not, because that's where they want to be. The gates of hell in C.S. Lewis's vision are not locked. They're not shut in jail with a lock, begging to get out. They can leave whenever they want. They can walk straight into heaven at any moment. But in order to leave hell and go to heaven, they must yield, submit, and be transformed by God. God says, you can come to me, enter my rest, enter my full grace. And they say, no, I don't want to be your being. I don't want to be transformed by you. And so God says, okay, be what you want to be. You choose to be away from me. That's what you are. I'm giving you over to your sin, to your sinful tendencies, your sinful desires. And this is what Romans means when it says God gave them over, or God gave them up to their sin. He's not kicking them out. He's letting them be what they want to be. So I'm concerned that when you read the verses like God gave them over, God gave them up, that you're interpreting this as meaning God's giving up on you. That's not really what it's getting at. This is about God giving up on God's letting humanity be what they want to be. When they worship idols, this is a natural result of what they are choosing. The sins that follow idol worship is not as if God saying, you worship an idol, I am cursing you with all these horrible things. Rather, what it's saying is, when you worship an idol, you do unnatural things. You have disordered the world. Your affections and your appetites and your loves are disordered. And then this is a natural result of that. And God is saying, I'm actually holding you back, but this is actually happening as a result of this, right? I mean, and to some extent, God is saying, I'm giving you over. I'm giving you up to the sins that you want. I'm giving what you want. But it doesn't end there. The end of the story of the prodigal son, what happens? After all that sin, the father welcomes the son back. And this is the gospel, all right? The gospel begins with God giving people over to their sin. Because that's what they are doing, that's what they want. But how does this gospel end? God brings them back in. He doesn't completely give up on them. Actually, it's the opposite. He embraces them back. That might be one way to think of this phrase, God gave up on them. It shouldn't be interpreted as God giving up on you. In fact, the whole story is, I've never given up on you. I sent my son, I died for you to bring you back. Okay,